Welcome to the final episode of the KW-1 series. Today we'll be making a diorama for this tank, so there's going to be a lot going on. Without any unnecessary talking, let's get started. The first thing we'll do when starting the diorama is make a simple sketch, like the one you can see on the screen. I place the tank on it, make some adjustments, and check if everything fits properly. Then I take a piece of cardboard. It can be from the tank's box. That's exactly what I used. And I trace two pieces from the sketch onto it. I'll be making the entire diorama out of XPS foam, which I cut using a regular knife. I attach the two previously prepared pieces of cardboard in place using tape. I cut the XPS foam using this kind of hot wire cutter for styrofoam and styrodur. It has a heated wire that goes through the foam like butter. I do it in a pretty primitive way, but it works, so it's fine. This is how the final result looks. I also cut out a few other pieces that will glue together later. All those extra parts were made using the same method as before. I cut out a piece of cardboard and trimmed it along a simple, very clean, straight line. For this, I'll be using wood glue. I'm going to spread it over the entire bottom half and then glue on the top half together with the other pieces of the diorama. To make everything stronger, I'll add toothpicks covered in glue, push them in firmly, and hammer them inside with something hard. At the very end, I'll cut off the excess ends of the toothpicks with a knife. And that's the whole process. For the most important part of the diorama, which is the nice-looking wood, I'll be using balsa wood. It's a really good type of wood for covering a diorama. I also mark the front with a pencil, and then, using a knife and a set square, I carefully cut everything to size, all four sides. Using the same wood glue I used for the previous parts, I also glue the wooden frame. Then I pin it down with push pins in the corners and in the middle so nothing bends or warps. I do the same with the rest of the pieces. If you're new to this channel, I highly encourage you to subscribe because it really helps me grow this brand new channel and you won't miss any new videos. Thank you. The last thing, once all the wooden pieces are in place, is taping everything together. I didn't show that part because it's a very boring process. I leave everything to dry overnight, and in the morning, when everything is rock solid, I slowly start trimming the pieces of wood with a knife so they fit properly. Next, I fill all the holes with wood filler. The bigger gaps I fill using a metal spatula, and the smaller ones, like tiny cracks or holes left by the pins, I fill using a silicone sculpting brush. It's normally used for sculpting, but here I use it to push the wood filler neatly into those small holes. Once the wood filler has fully hardened, I sand everything down using this sanding sponge you see on the screen. I'll speed this part up a bit because it did take me some time. And here are the results. This is the final stage of finishing the wood. Once everything is sanded smooth, I apply PVA glue over the entire surface and then spread it evenly with a brush. This will make everything more durable, harder, and less prone to damage. What you see here is unfortunately my mistake, because I forgot to record the moment when I applied the AK texture called Terrain's Dark Earth with a large brush. But it wasn't anything special. I just spread that paste over the whole surface. Now comes the more fun part, because we'll be using the Smart Mud XL Universal Terrain Brown. This is a product that's really great for making dioramas. I've used it a few times already. You simply lay it down and spread it across the entire diorama. What I applied earlier has a rough finish, so this paste will spread even better over everything. Later, when I'm done, I'll press the entire tank and its tracks into this paste. And the tank won't get dirty because of the special properties of this product. It's very spongy and works perfectly when you want to imprint tracks or footprints. From the same company that makes smart mud, we have little stones and sand. You could just use some from your garden as well, but I didn't have any, so I bought this set together with the previous product. I sprinkle everything across the entire surface, putting the bigger stones into the depressions, and this is how it looks. Now, using AK's gravel and sand fixer, I'll pour it over everything with a pipette so that it binds together and doesn't come off during painting. Now, to bring our diorama to life, I'll start planting the grass. I'm showing you the grass tufts I have here. The first one is the shortest grass. Then we move on to longer ones. And the longest one is this yellow straw-like grass. And the one at the very end is a mix, which I'll use later to fill everything in and blend it all together. I start by preparing the wood glue, which I dilute a bit with water. Then I mix it and apply it over the entire diorama. When I'm done with that, I'll show you the machine, the tool I'll be using to plant the grass. It's a static grass applicator with a cable that you place against the diorama, so the grass I'm planting stands upright. I'm showing you the process now. I simply put the grass into the sieve, start with the shortest one, and shake it over the entire diorama. Then I turn the diorama upside down, tap it a bit, and I get beautiful grass standing straight up, just like in real life. Then I repeat the process with progressively longer grasses. First with the medium-length grass for quite a while, and then with the straw-like grass, which I apply last. I'll show you the results in just a moment. Once we've completely finished building our diorama, it's time for painting. I start by applying a primer, which I thin 1:1, meaning I use equal parts paint and thinner. I'm using the primer that you can see shown in the video. I start painting the grass with a darker Vallejo air paint, so I don't need to thin it at all. I just pour it straight into the airbrush and cover all of the grass. It has to be really well covered, every single part. Then I take another Vallejo air paint, this time a lighter shade of green. Shake it well, and also put it into the airbrush. But now I spray only the tips of the grass to get that really nice final effect. With the rest of the airbrushing, we'll be painting the ground. I do it in a very similar way to the grass. First, I apply the base color, and then I add a second color on top as a highlight to brighten it up. Using these paints that have very similar tones, I'll now paint the individual stones to bring the whole diorama to life. This really gives the entire scene that nice pop effect. And trust me, it's absolutely worth spending at least 2 hours picking out and painting all those little rocks we added earlier. Now, using these ammo dry brush paints, I'll dry brush the whole surface with this sandy color to highlight all those earthy tones, if you can call them that. Then, with this light green, mixed with a bit of yellow, I'll brighten the grass even more. Now you can see that I'm doing something completely different from what I was doing before, because I'm going to 3D print a few extra details for our diorama to make it feel more alive. I'll be printing shovels, which we'll place near the trench, and a few shells. Actually, spent shell casings. Because this diorama is meant to show the tank after a battle, especially since it has lots of bullet holes. Here, I'm also doing the usual stuff every 3D printer guy does. I click print and it starts printing. For the people who noticed what I was doing and saw my printer, the Sonic Mini 8KS. It's a really good printer with great detail, but I noticed that the resin that works best with this printer comes from this exact company. Resins from other brands that I've used never worked as well as the original resin made specifically for this printer by Phrosen. At the very beginning, what I was doing was mixing the resin to improve its quality for printing later. For those who don't do this, I just leave the resin in the printer instead of constantly pouring in fresh resin. But every time I print something new, I mix the resin well because, like paint, it needs to be properly mixed. Okay, after After showing you a few clips of me printing things, I of course filed everything down and primed it with the same primer we used earlier on the diorama. Now, let's step away from the 3D prints and get back to painting our diorama. I'll be using these 3 products to add washes and other typical effects. First, I'll start with the streaking brusher and go over everything, every crevice, but more or less over the entire surface. And then I'll wipe off any excess that I don't like using oil paint thinner. I'm doing this not only in the areas around the tracks, but also in the deeper spots as well. To emphasize the deep areas, I'll be using AK's brown wash, and I apply it only in the darkest spots, not over the entire surface, just in those very dark areas, like you can see in the video. The third effect will be AK gouache. I use it a bit differently than the previous paints because I apply it to the brightest points. Since it's an acrylic paint, I can later blend everything together using just plain water from a cup. I also painted the shovels in basic colors, the wood in a light sandy tone and the steel in a gray shade. I then add some chipping with a sponge using black and brown and finish it off with AK's rust oil wash. I also add some extra shadows and dirt using an oil brusher and then clean everything up with oil paint thinner. I make small holes with a scalpel, and using the same wood glue as before, I glue the shovels into the base so they look like they're stuck into the ground. People who watch my channel have probably seen the short I made about how to paint a spent shell casing like this. So if you're new here, I invite you to check it out if you're interested. And why does this casing look the way it does, instead of being one solid color? I'll explain. When a round is fired, the casing is exposed to extreme heat, which causes the metal to change color. At the very end, we still need to glue the tank in place. I press it firmly into the diorama and then press down the tracks as well, just to be sure it won't come loose. I also glue the spent shell casings around the outside of the tank because they're simply ejected from the vehicle to save space inside. They're always thrown out after a battle, which is why I glue them scattered across the grass. We're getting close to the end of making the diorama and finishing the series. We still need to paint the wooden frame black, and it's important to note that I apply the black paint with a sponge, not a brush. That way, there are no visible brush strokes, and the wood ends up evenly and cleanly covered. And that's it! Our KW-1 diorama is finally complete. I hope you enjoyed watching the entire process from start to finish. For those of you who are new here, make sure to check out my previous videos about the KW series. You'll find a lot of tips, tricks, and more cool builds. If you like this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any future content. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.